Did a friend recently pass away?
No.
There was someone with whom you shared a deep emotional attachment.
No.
Someone not close, but not too distant, but you liked them. You hated them.
I did lose an uncle.
I'm getting a J or a John, K, L, M, N, O, P.
Uncle Zed.
Yes. Uncle Zed wants to speak.
Uncle Zed, my pet rat.
Yes, which is very difficult for me because I have to translate the rat speak.
I didn't have a rat.
I'm very disappointed that this dead rat is lying to me about being your pet. But this deceitful rat wishes you well in a new endeavor involving finance.
A TV show about science?
Exactly. And your next subject is weather or zoology.
Pseudoscience.
And I'm sensing you don't believe in it.
That's right. That's amazing. How did he know?
So I said this before in part 1 of my Journey to Atheism series, but my favorite subject to study in school was always science. I had such a profound respect for the work that scientists do because I was able to understand just how many advancements had come about in human innovation through increased knowledge about how the universe works through the scientific method. Inherent in the field of science, as opposed to religion and superstition, is a heavy emphasis on skepticism. A good scientist must entertain doubt in all new discoveries and ideas, applying intense theoretical and experimental scrutiny to find out how natural processes behave consistently, and also must be willing to rethink previous hypotheses and theories and discard them if they don't hold up to new evidence. Throughout high school, most of what we were learning in science class was about the raw information that had already been gained from the use of the scientific method, but there were some times where the class would be taught how to think like a scientist, which is much more than just taking in factual information. At the beginning of environmental science class in senior year, the teacher taught a course on skepticism and showed to the class an episode of the 2005 show The Eyes of Nye about pseudoscience, of which I just played a clip at the beginning of this video. The stuff talked about in the episode was all pretty basic, and it was nothing I really hadn't already heard before, since when I was going through abandoning religious doctrine, I consulted a lot of sources on skeptical philosophy, but the episode was still fun and taught legitimately good lessons. I really couldn't help but see the irony of a non-biased, intelligent, and useful course in skepticism presented by a well-known atheist like Bill Nye being taught in a Catholic school where we were taught all kinds of superstitious nonsense, like that by eating a communion wafer, you are literally consuming the body of Jesus Christ. But at the same time, I was still glad that the kids in class were actually being taught to think skeptically about superstitions. And even though the episode we watched in class did not directly deal with organized religion, most likely because that would have gotten a big no-no from whichever network Eyes of Nye was shown on, I was still holding out hope that watching the episode in class might just have a chance of making some of the kids in the classroom use the tools of skepticism given in it to question their own religious beliefs that were impressed upon them by their parents, and they might realize how much superstition was joined at the hip with those beliefs. However, I might have been somewhat overly optimistic. Because, you see, I had a lot of respect for my science teacher during my senior year, as she seemed like a very reasonable and intelligent person, and honestly, from the way she was talking to the class about things, I kind of thought to myself, there's no way this woman is a Christian. I mean, she is someone who's intelligent and cares about science, promotes skepticism and doubt and disbelief in things that have no evidence to her class. There's no possible way she can really believe the Catholic theology taught in this school. Apparently, I was wrong in my assumption, however. Because one day, while we were in school, this was after President Trump decided to kill the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, by the way, and because of a bunch of kids in class talking about how, World War III was on the horizon and stuff, the environmental science teacher decided to get into a discussion with the class about the dangers of nuclear war. And at the end of the discussion, she might have said one of the dumbest things I have ever heard. She said to the class, "Don't worry, even if the world is destroyed by a nuclear winter, we will all just be in heaven together afterwards." This disturbed me for a number of reasons, some of which included the fact that a person teaching about how we should take great care of our environment apparently thinks that it is actually completely pointless since we will all eventually be in heaven anyway, well, except for atheists like me, who she was apparently just fine with supposedly burning in hell forever. But the thing that disturbed and confused me the most was the fact that this person, who seemed to be so logical, skeptical, and intelligent, could believe such ridiculous nonsense and unfounded claims about reality as the Christian afterlife. and to just blurt it out so casually in science class, like, yeah, when we die, forget all the actual scientific evidence that points to everything about our consciousness being stored in our brains, which completely cease functioning after death. No, we actually have souls that will transcend our physical bodies after death and will be judged by a magical sky daddy as to whether we deserve to chill out in eternal bliss or be burned in agony and torture forever. Pay no attention to the fact that there is no evidence whatsoever of any of this. It's true, okay, and I'm a science teacher, so you can trust me. At the time, I just couldn't wrap my mind around how someone like this could actually buy into this stuff, but in retrospect, it really shouldn't have been that surprising to me. I mean, if you're a scientist, you're much more likely to be atheist than the general public, but it's not like there haven't been, and still are, tons of Christian, Muslim, or Hindu scientists. There's no shortage of intelligent, reasonable, and skeptical religious people in the world, and very clearly not all religious people are just ignorant, uneducated bigots who are in denial of basic facts of reality. I mean, let's be real, a lot of them are, but a lot of them also aren't. But why? I mean, what could be the reason why intelligent, reasonable, and skeptical people like my senior year science teacher buy into such illogical, unskeptical, ridiculous nonsense as religious doctrine? It just doesn't seem to make any sense. Well, I really must look no further than myself for the answer to that question. I was not always an atheist. There was a time when I was a believing Christian, and I believed in heaven and hell and the afterlife. I believed in miracles, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I believed that Moses was part of the Red Sea. I believed that I had a soul and could communicate with God Almighty if I really tried. I believed that by eating a communion wafer I was literally consuming the body of Jesus. And that thing my environmental science teacher said about how if the world ends, it's fine because we all go to heaven anyway, that is something that I could easily see my younger self blurting out. Granted, I was a little kid, and my science teacher is a full-grown adult, so the expectations are, a little different, but honestly, even when I look back to it when I was little, I've always had a very skeptical and scientifically minded demeanor. I mean, whenever things didn't make sense to me as a kid, I studied them and put them under scrutiny, and if claims about the world did not hold up as scientific evidence or logic, I quickly disavowed them. I believed that I was consuming the body of Jesus when I was eating the Eucharist, but I never did so expecting any kind of significant effect on my body or soul. I did believe that the Bible was the source of morality, but I never consulted it when trying to determine right from wrong and instead made my own conclusions. I believed that prayer worked sometimes, but I never prayed much myself because I didn't think it would actually have a noticeable and verifiable effect. I believed in miracles, but never really counted on one as a solution. I believed in the afterlife, but I pretty much lived my life as though it was the only one I had. In other words, when I was a believing Christian, my religious beliefs were deeply at odds with my thought processes and how I carried myself in my day-to-day life. This was due to the fact that I was experiencing major cognitive compartmentalization.
Compartmentalization is a subconscious psychological defense mechanism used to avoid cognitive dissonance, or the mental discomfort and anxiety caused by a person's having conflicting values, cognitions, emotions, beliefs, etc. within themselves. Compartmentalization allows these conflicting ideas to coexist by inhibiting direct or explicit acknowledgement and interaction between separate compartmentalized self-states. Psychoanalytic views. Psychoanalysis considers that whereas isolation separates thoughts from feeling, compartmentalization separates different, incompatible, cognitions from each other. As a secondary, intellectual defense, it may be linked to rationalization.
As I said before, I was a very skeptical kid, just naturally so, really. I was not readily convinced by supernatural explanations that could not be picked apart or studied. By the time I was about 6 years old, I believe, is when I was able to determine that Santa Claus was not real due to a lack of evidence and the incredibly unrealistic idea that a fat man on a sleigh pulled by flying reindeer could possibly deliver gifts to approximately 1 billion households in a 24-hour period so discreetly that it was without any professional documentation. By the time I disavowed belief in Santa Claus at age 6, I had already stopped believing the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and any other form of traditional myth that I had been brought up with. And I soon disavowed all belief in the supernatural after that. I refused to believe in ghosts, tarot cards, magic, luck, psychics, curses, astrology, and any other man-made superstition that did not seem to make any sense within the context of reality. And I rendered all supernatural beliefs to mere fantasy, or things that actually did have naturalistic explanations that were not yet known. However, despite me completely disavowing belief in the superstitious and supernatural at an extremely young age, I did make one special exception. I believed that nothing magic or supernatural actually existed, except for God. He was real, but everything else was fake. Even as a young child, when I made this proclamation myself, I still couldn't fully justify the fact that I believed in God but not anything else supernatural. I wrote off all other superstitions and religions so easily, because they just seemed to be ridiculous and have such a lack of evidence to their claims. And yet, even as a 6-year-old, there was this small part of me that had a feeling that the religion I was raised in was really a lot more similar to the superstitious nonsense I had disavowed than anything concurrent with reality. And I saw no solid evidence for God's existence. I was raised to believe that his existence was supposedly incredibly obvious and common sense, but if that were the case, then why was the fact of his existence not talked about in any science or history book that I read? But I still believed in him, and would go on believing in him for many more years before becoming an agnostic and eventually an atheist last year. I was not holding my religious beliefs to the same standard that I was holding any other supernatural claim that I came across. I had compartmentalized my beliefs about God as existing in one section of my thought process that was not able to interact with my normal thought process, because if it did, it would be dismantled, and I did this because I was not willing to believe that nearly every single adult who I came across was wrong in what they were teaching me, because I was told that without believing God, life is empty and meaningless, and non-believers lose an essential part of themselves, and I would not dare to entertain doubts or skepticism to the God claim for fear of burning in hell forever. And I think this is the case for the majority of religious people, honestly. Most Christians, including my environmental science teacher, suffer from debilitating religious compartmentalization, and must keep their religious beliefs separate from their everyday thought processes in order to function. That's why Christians can support the LGBTQ community while their holy book says that gays are worthy of death. That's why Christians can believe in the afterlife but tweet out #YOLO with enthusiasm. That's why Christians can be free market capitalist warmongers despite Jesus denouncing wealth and all forms of violence. That's why Christians can believe that atheists deserve to burn in hell for eternity, but can still admit to themselves that many atheists are nice and friendly, perfectly normal people. That's why Christians can feel perfectly comfortable looking at porn, despite the fact that Jesus said the mere desire of lust is inherently sinful. And that's why a Christian science teacher can educate a classroom on how important it is to protect the environment, while still believing that doing so is completely pointless, since the earth is just heaven's waiting room. Religious compartmentalization. Of course, compartmentalization is not merely a religious state of mind. For example, a person might make the secular case that abortion is immoral and wrong, but the killing of innocent civilians in war is completely justifiable. There's a lot of compartmentalization going on there. However, religion almost seems to have a compartmentalization down to a science, and is incredibly effective at training a human brain for compartmentalization. I mean, you stand to lose nothing when you stop believing in Santa Claus, other than maybe a chance at a few presents. But if you stop believing in God, you are told that you will lose an incredibly inconceivable award that will last for eternity. You will lose the favor of the most powerful being in the universe. You will be tortured forever. Your soul will cry out for meaning, and you will no longer be whole, going about with a complete lack of purpose. All of this will happen if you stop believing in the fairy tales you have been raised with from birth, having nearly every single adult authority figure and peer reinforcing them to you as the unadulterated, ultimate truth that cannot be questioned and is the most important truth in the world. Something like that the children are so heavily indoctrinated into and made to feel is so important to who they are is a very difficult thing for them to let go. For most people, really. But it is also a very difficult thing to continue believing in now that we're in the information age and people have access to knowledge and experiences of a massive number of people that all believe very different things from one another. And so, a line in the sand is drawn to where religious people compartmentalize their beliefs, and do not hold them to the same standard of morality and logic that they do with any other belief they have. Of course, compartmentalized minds of those who are raised religious is not inevitable. Someone like me, whose beliefs were once compartmentalized, no longer have cognitive dissonance. I no longer suffer any mental discomfort or anxiety anymore because I don't have conflicting values, and I judge all claims, religious or otherwise, by the same skeptical and naturalistic moral and logical standards. But then, of course, not everyone who breaks free from religious compartmentalization actually leaves religion. There is also the fundamentalist extremist Christian who, rather than taking the bold and brave step of challenging what they believe to be an extremely important part of their lives, have instead let their religious beliefs infect their mind and hold far greater influence over how they think and act than a moderate religious person would. The fundamentalist Christian mind is not compartmentalized. He does not need to rectify logical and reasonable beliefs about reality with his religious beliefs because he simply wholeheartedly rejects logic, science, secular morality, and anything about the natural world that might contradict what Scripture teaches. A pitiful existence, to be sure, but at the very least a less complicated one to live in than the compartmentalized Christian moderate who must switch back and forth from a reasonable individual and an insane person who believes that they eat the flesh of a 2,000-year-old dead carpenter every Sunday. By contrast, the fundamentalist religious person has given fully into religious insanity and can easily dismiss any contradictory evidence, feelings, or experiences with the belief that God is the supreme being and anything not endorsed by the Bible is automatically wrong. Let this video be a PSA to any religious folks watching. If you often feel symptoms of cognitive dissonance, conflicting beliefs, hesitation to doubt certain beliefs, incompatible thought processes, instinctive rationalization of beliefs, or denial of contradictory evidence regarding your religion, then you are suffering from religious compartmentalization, and the cure is to take a good, long, hard, unbiased look at what you believe and why you believe it, and to not shy away from any doubts you might have, or logical inconsistencies that you might possess. Warning. Doing so might have the unfortunate side effect of turning you into a complete nutjob religious lunatic who preaches complete, utter, incomprehensible nonsense.
Is Pokemon demonic?
The answer to that is yes, they are all Oriental demons.
But, if you do it right, odds are you will come out an agnostic atheist, and those symptoms of compartmentalization I listed earlier will disappear. But don't take my word for it. Ask any ex-Christian and they will be able to tell you that their thought processes are a heck of a lot less gargled than they used to be. Anyway, this has been the Skeptical Skeptic, aka Michael Thomas Chiango. Please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I post a new video every week, either Sunday or Monday. Be sure to check out my other videos, and remember to be compassionate, be understanding, but most importantly, never stop questioning. Bye. Your God is an awful God, he reigns with an iron fist. His wisdom, power, and love are in very short supply. Your God is an awful God, he'll fall from heaven to earth. Your God is an awful God, and you should probably move on. Have you accepted the flying spaghetti monster as your personal Lord and Savior?